Both Mexico and the European Union are hoping to reach agreement with the United States to avert new trade tariffs threatened by Donald Trump. The U.S. president says he'll impose 30% levies on imports starting next month. The EU is holding out hope of reaching a deal and says it won't impose countermeasures for now. The escalating dispute upends months of negotiations with two of America's biggest trading partners.
Doctora Claudia Sheinbaum Pardo.
Mexico's president was inaugurating a new hospital on the weekend when she was asked about the latest tariff threats from the U.S. Claudia Sheinbaum said she believes a new trade deal can be reached by the new deadline, but not at any cost.
We are clear about the kinds of things we can work out with the U.S. government and what we can't. And there's one thing that is never negotiable, and that is the sovereignty of our country.
Mexico is America's largest source of imports. In a letter posted to social media, the U.S. president said he had no choice but to raise the tariffs because Mexico had not done enough to curb cross-border drug trafficking.
The money coming in, the tariffs coming in at hundreds of billions of dollars.
Trump defended his trade wars during an interview on Fox News with his daughter-in-law, Lara Trump.
The potential of this country is incredible. It's been run very foolishly. It's been run stupidly, so stupidly. And some of the countries are very upset now because they've been taking advantage of us for 30, 40 years.
According to Trump, that includes the 27 members of the European Union, his country's largest trading partner. He blamed long-term, large and persistent trade deficits with the bloc for the new tariff rate. In Brussels, the EU chief was touting a new trade pact with Indonesia when she was asked about the U.S. tariffs. She said the EU would follow a two-track approach. The first, try to seek a negotiated settlement by the August deadline.
On the second track, since the very beginning, we have worked and now are ready to respond with countermeasures. We've prepared for this, and we can respond with countermeasures if necessary.
The U.S. tariffs are a major escalation that upend weeks of careful negotiations. This expert believes Trump's bid to ramp up the pressure will fail.
Well, it shows that Donald Trump thinks he can maybe get a deal by threatening to escalate. But I think it will backfire. I think what he has signaled to the EU is that all the efforts that the European Commission has made to try to accommodate, try to negotiate a deal, meant nothing for Trump.
This latest salvo from the White House echoes a form letter sent to 24 other trading partners this week, all of them threatening hefty tariffs if no trade deal is reached by August the 1st.
Here in Germany, Chancellor Friedrich Merz says Trump's threat to impose 30% tariffs on goods from the European Union would strike at the core of Germany's export industry. Merz told German public broadcaster ARD he will work intensively with other European leaders to resolve the escalating dispute. The chancellor stressed that the threat of tariffs are a negotiating tactic by Washington. But Merz said it would be a serious blow if the levies were imposed. For more on this, I'm joined now by Jeffrey Frankel, economist and professor at Harvard University. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good to be with you.
So as we heard there in the report, European leaders are saying Trump is attempting to ramp up the pressure around these free trade talks. Do you agree with that assessment?
I do. They're not free trade talks, by the way. We had something pretty close to free trade before, and we're moving away from that. President Trump is moving the world away from that, unfortunately. I think he has this model of himself as a negotiator. He's staking out a very strong position, 30%. They say it's real, it's going to happen. He's not going to back down, but I doubt if 30% will go into effect on August 1st. And if it does, I doubt if it'll last many days.
So what would you recommend for EU leaders? Should they try to counter hard Trump, or should they try to appease him in these talks?
Well, it depends what you mean by appease. They should offer him things that he can spin to his base and claim that he has a great victory. It doesn't have to be large in truth, but a few things that he can claim victory on. And then if he doesn't come to a reasonable deal on August 1st and puts the 30% tariffs into effect, yes, the EU should respond, and our other trading partners should respond, I think, in kind. You can't say, well, we failed. Might as well now try to make the most of it and give in after he puts the 30% on, because, or at the last minute, because he could easily reverse himself. After a few days, he hears from business people that it's not working very well, and he could easily change his mind again.
Now, the European Union is, of course, an economic superpower. What, if any, leverage does it have in mitigating this dispute?
Well, of course, there's trade goes both directions. Trump is fixated on the fact that the U.S. has a substantial bilateral trade surplus in goods and in merchandise. Deficit with Europe. Europe has a surplus. But reciprocally, I hate to use that word since Trump has misused it so much, but the U.S. has a substantial surplus in services bilaterally with the EU. And so the EU has weapons that it can use to make things difficult for those service providers.
Now, how exactly would U.S. consumers and the U.S. economy be affected by these tariffs if they're implemented?
Well, like all the tariffs that he's threatened since the beginning of the year, and those that he's done, it should raise the cost to consumers of imports. It should raise the cost of inputs like steel, which goes into other things that we make domestically, and it'll hurt our exporters, especially if you retaliate. But even if you don't, if you make it difficult for countries to export to you, it'll become difficult for you to export to them as the exchange rate adjusts, or you cause a worldwide depression, or something else adjusts.
And what exactly could a transatlantic tariff escalation mean for the global economy?
Well, it would mean that the trade war is serious. I mean, it's already serious, but we haven't yet seen much of an effect on real economic activity. We haven't yet seen a recession, and I would think that if it's 30% versus 30%, and anything similar with other countries, that you're talking about a global collapse of trade and a global recession.
All right, that was Jeffrey Frankel, economist and professor at Harvard University. Thank you very much for your assessment.
Thank you.
David Kleimann is a trade expert. He works for ODI Europe, a global affairs think tank. And of course, he joins us now. David, what's your sense? Should the EU counter hard against Trump or try to appease him, or 30% tariffs essentially a fait accompli at this point?
Well, thanks, Michael. I think what should be crystal clear to everyone in Brussels and the member states' capitals is that the Trump administration is not aiming to negotiate a trade agreement in the traditional sense with a give and take of concessions, but really the terms of a full EU surrender. And that is, of course, not only undesirable and unacceptable for the EU in political and economic terms, it is also crucial for everyone involved to understand that the US position vis-à-vis the various large economies and the US trading partners in the world is based on an enormous bluff. That is to say, these tariffs, if they would ever come into force, are politically and economically unsustainable for Trump at home. That is because these tariffs would largely decouple US producers and consumers from the EU's and other economies, would decouple the US from other economies in the world and impose an enormous, tremendous self-inflicted harm on those US businesses, consumers, and workers, and very, very likely lead to high inflation and a US recession by the end of 2025, even without countermeasures taken by US trading partners. So that in turn means that the EU and its member states must now call Mr. Trump's bluff, stop offering concessions, and respond with the only language that Mr. Trump understands, and that is a language of strength. And the EU has its economic strength, and it must now impose countermeasures starting tomorrow.
Well, let's talk more specifically about that, David. What leverage specifically does the EU have over Trump in this dispute?
Sure. I think, the EU has prepared retaliatory measures against US steel and aluminum tariffs worth 20 billion euro in US trading goods, and that will automatically kick in tomorrow if they're not further delayed. The EU has also prepared a package of tariffs covering 91 billion euro worth of US exports that could be authorized tomorrow to apply on August 1st if the US goes ahead with its tariff plans. In addition, the Council could pull the trigger on its newest trade weapon, the anti-coercion instrument, to impose additional countermeasures against US services exports to the EU. This instrument was specifically designed to enable the EU to respond to acts of coercion against its member states. And the time is now really to see whether the EU leaders talk about strategic autonomy is serious and credible.
David, we have less than half a minute, but I do want to ask you this. One of the big issues that the EU has always had is the extent to which it is unified. Is, in fact, the EU united when it comes to possible countermeasures?
Well, that's a really important question. And I think we've now, with the letter that has been received yesterday, we see a more and more united front. What is perhaps important to note, especially for our German audience, is that the German government is the weak link in the EU chain. That is because of the tremendous exposure of German exports to trade with the US. So it is really important for the German conservatives to understand that the best possible outcome can only be achieved if countermeasures and a language of strength against the Trump administration are applied as of tomorrow.
Okay, we'll have to leave it there. That is David Kleimann. Many, many thanks, sir.
Thanks for having me.